We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
So, Anas, we're going to talk about your conference, which starts in Glasgow on Friday, but I have to ask you about that opinion poll at the weekend. There seems to be a trend that Scottish Labour's poll rating is in free fall. I mean, what's your reaction to that poll?
Look, I think you have to look at all these things in the context. And the context is that when I took on this job 4 years ago, we were 34 points behind the SNP. When we were this far out from the last general election, we were 14 points behind the SNP. And I accept that the poll at the weekend looked and demonstrated a challenging position. But I honestly believe that we can overcome that challenge, that we are on the pitch, that we will compete. And in my view, we will win the election in May 2026, because a lot can and will happen over the next 15 months. And I honestly believe that once the choice is put before the people of Scotland about continued decline on the SNP or a new direction with the Scottish Labour Party, I'm confident they'll choose that new direction. But it's also worth looking at votes that have actually been cast since the general election. We've had countless council by-elections where we have won an overwhelming number of them compared to the SNP. And just last week, we won a council by-election where there was an 8.6% swing to the Labour Party from the SNP. So I'm not saying you can read everything into individual council by-elections, but it does demonstrate that people are frustrated with their SNP government. They do believe they're failing the people of Scotland. And that's why I'm confident once we put our prospectus to the people, we will go out there, we'll earn their trust, earn their support, and I believe we'll win the election in May 2026.
Would you accept, though, that there's not been any catastrophic decisions by Scottish Labour over the last couple of months, and yet the poll rating has gone backwards? Is that down to people's perceptions and their feeling of disappointment in the Labour government?
Well, I'd make 2 points on that, Paul. The first one is, I honestly don't believe there was any route or is any route to the Scottish Labour Party winning in 2026 if we hadn't got rid of a rotten Tory government in 2024, because that was an overwhelming demand from the people of Scotland. And that's why Scotland led the way. We elected 37 Scottish Labour MPs and we were able to get rid of a Tory government. Had we not done that, I don't think we would have been on the pitch going into an election in May 2026. And the second thing to say is, I don't think we can downplay the scale of the damage done by the last Tory government and what this incoming UK Labour government has had to grapple with and try to overcome. Because over time, you've had governments come in when public services were broken, or the public finances were shot to bits, or when the economy was flatlining. This government has come in with all three at the exact same time. And the decision that the Prime Minister and the Chancellors had to make is, do you stabilise the public finances? They chose to do so. Do you end the era of austerity? They have done so decisively. And if you are going to do those two things, that means you have to make difficult decisions around where the income is then generated from. And on all three of those questions, people may have a different view. They might think we should have long grasped balancing the public finances. They might think we should have long grasped the end of austerity. In my view, that would have been a mistake. So they've had to make difficult decisions. That's what incoming governments had to do. But I honestly believe they are putting us on the right footing. They're taking us in the right direction across the UK, moving on from the Tories. Let's not forget who we had to get rid of, and charting a different course for our country, starting the process of change. And you've seen it already this week, where a commitment in other parts of the UK to create 2 million more appointments to clear NHS backlogs is being delivered now in NHS England. But we're not getting the same speed of response here in Scotland because we have an incompetent, moribund Scottish government that has lost its way and is incompetent government.
Isn't it looking, though, that 2026 is going to be a mid-term election on the record of the UK government rather than a judgment on the performance of the Scottish government?
Well, I don't accept that, because I think the SNP would love to make the election in 2026 a referendum on the performance of a UK Labour government. So people don't talk about and they don't think about the SNP's record. And isn't it interesting, after 18 years of government, they're not standing and campaigning because they think they've got a strong record, not campaigning and standing on a platform of this is the positive things we've delivered for Scotland. All they want to do is talk about attacks elsewhere. Whereas I think when people focus on the SNP's record, the fact that 1 in 6 Scots are on an NHS waiting list, the fact on John Swinney's watch that schools have fallen down the international league table, the fact that we have huge backlogs in our courts and basic crimes aren't now being investigated in our country, the fact that we've got billions of pounds of waste, public money not being respected, I think given the choice of further decline under the SNP or a new direction with Scottish Labour, and we'll be setting out what that means in more detail this week, I'm confident they'll choose that new direction. That means how we fix the NHS. It means how we close the opportunity gap. It means how we reinvigorate our democracy by pushing power out to our local communities. It means how we deliver safer streets and safer communities with more police on the beat. That is what the choice is going to be in May 2026, supporting growing Scotland's economy, reforming our public services and delivering for the people of Scotland, or continued decline with the SNP.
I'm interested in your relationship with Keir Starmer because clearly you've got a good relationship with him. If you take, say, the winter fuel payment cut, you were not in favour of the means test that was announced by Rachel Reeves. You were disappointed with the WASPy decision. How forthright have you been in private with the Prime Minister and things like that?
Keir Starmer and I have a very close personal relationship. We have a very close political relationship. And because we have a close personal and political relationship, we are able to have robust conversations that respect each other's position, respect each other's mandate, and know it comes from the right place. But I honestly believe he is doing the meaningful work to deliver for the people of Scotland. Now, people can talk about individual decisions that they have a frustration with or they disagree with. You've mentioned the winter fuel payment yourself already, and I've been really clear that we wouldn't hand the power back. We would instead take the power back that's meant to be a Scottish benefit this year, and we would reinstate the winter fuel payment. But if you look at the delivery of this UK Labour government, 200,000 Scots have got a pay rise because of a UK Labour government, only possible because we got rid of the Tories. We've got the New Deal for working people, the biggest upgrade in workers' rights in a generation, only possible because we have a UK Labour government and we got rid of the Tories. We've got GB Energy, a publicly owned energy company headquartered in Aberdeen. Within months, the legislation passed and the company being set up. Only possible because we have a UK Labour government and we got rid of the Tories. We have the largest budget settlement in the history of Scottish devolution, decisively ending the era of austerity with £5.2 billion of more money for the Scottish Government to spend on vital public services.
Why didn't you claim credit for that at an earlier stage?
Only possible because we have a UK Labour government and we got rid of the Tories. These are the things that the SNP and the Tories will want you to forget. They'll want you to forget Boris Johnson. They want you to forget Rishi Sunak. They want you to forget Liz Truss. And they want you to forget the scale of the damage that has now been having to be undone. And that's why we've got to get on with the job. Of course, I'll continue to push a UK Labour government to go further and faster, to deliver for every part of the country, in particular for Scotland. But I'm not going to pretend that every problem is caused by Westminster, or somehow I'm going to wait for Westminster to fix all our problems. We have got the powers, we have got the resources, we have got the talent, we have got the people in Scotland to make a significant difference with the powers we have here in Scotland. But we have a government that deliberately chooses not to use it, either because they don't have the imagination or because they don't have the will. That is fundamentally going to change in May 2026, where we're going to use the power of Scotland, the resources of Scotland, the talent of the people of Scotland to deliver for the people of Scotland. That's the choice in May 2026.
You want to be the next First Minister of Scotland, so you want to be the leader of Scotland. Who are you more loyal to, the Scottish people or the Labour government at Westminster?
My first loyalty, including to the Scottish Labour Party, including to Scottish Labour MSPs, including to Scottish Labour members, my first loyalty will always be to the people of Scotland, because that's who I'm seeking to serve. I have changed the Scottish Labour Party because I want to lead Scotland. I have changed our policy position and our platform because I want to change the country that I love, Scotland, and that will always be my focus. And people will see that over the coming weeks and months as we set out what that alternative is going to be. As I say, we're going to set out how we fix the NHS, how we make it fit for the future, what we do around reforming further and higher education to make sure every young person gets opportunities, what we're going to do to support businesses using the levers we have around rates, around planning, around licensing, around skills, around regional public transport, around regional economic development, what we're going to do with our enterprise agencies. All of these are areas that we're going to set out quite clearly how there is a visible difference and meaningful difference between a stale, tired SNP that's lost its way and a Scottish Labour Party that's ready to deliver for the people of Scotland.
Is Keir Starmer your boss?
Well, the people of Scotland are my boss. I lead the Scottish Labour Party, but the people of Scotland are my boss, and it's the people of Scotland I want to serve, and it's First Minister of Scotland I want to be. I'm not running to be Prime Minister. If I wanted to be Prime Minister, I would have stood for election last year. I'm standing for election next year because I want to be First Minister, and I want to deliver for the people of Scotland.
One final question on reserved issues. Energy bills, that's something that really hurts our readers. You know, the amount they're paying that's ending up in the pockets of these big energy firms. Now, Labour did promise lower energy bills. We're only about 7 months in, so energy bills could still fall, but they have risen since last July. Do you sense that people are frustrated with Labour about this? When's it going to change?
So I think there's frustration across every part of government, as well as the public, around how we make sure we are reducing the cost of living burden on people and how we are reducing the cost of energy. And part of the challenge we have here is, of course, energy prices aren't set by government, but of course, government has an influence in terms of how they are reforming our energy market, how they are creating the investments needed in order to have that clean energy future where energy production can be cheaper rather than what it is right now. And so you'll know this already, Paul, but when even before the election, it was predicted by Ofgem that the first decision they would make would be an energy price rise. But this government is working day and night in order to reform the energy market, to make the investments we need so we can have that clean energy future, so we can draw down people's bills. And that, for me, is, of course, an urgency. I think there is an urgency given the huge cost of living crisis. The cost of living crisis, actually, that's being made worse by an SNP government that is going to see council tax being hiked across the country because they aren't properly funding local government, and making it worse because they're making it more expensive for people to get to work. For example, reinstating the peak rail fares on trains. All of these things are going to increase the burden for working people across the country rather than reduce the burden for working people across the country.
Are you confident? Are you confident
in energy bills? But specifically in energy bills, how we bring down energy bills is by, of course, reforming the market, but it's also about how we have that clean energy of the future. And right now in Scotland, I completely agree, we have to win the renewables revolution. Oil and gas has got to play a significant role for decades to come. Of course it does. It's significant for our economy, but also for our energy security. We've got to have that surge for renewables, and we've got huge potential in Scotland around offshore wind, onshore wind, tidal, solar, believe it or not, in some parts of the country, hydrogen, of course. But we've also got to make sure we're having the clean energy baseline that is currently being ignored by this SNP government. And that's one example of a tangible difference that a Scottish Labour government will make. Right now, 20% of Scotland's electricity usage comes from nuclear energy sources. But the money and the investment doesn't come to Scotland. It goes to, or the jobs don't come to Scotland. It goes to other parts of the UK because the SNP has an ideological block on new nuclear energy, even though it's clean, zero carbon energy. That's why we will remove that ideological block, which will attract billions of pounds of investment, will create thousands of jobs, and help us deliver that energy security that Scotland rightly demands and is crying out for.
The thing is, people hear words and phrases like renewables revolution, net zero, yet their bills are going up. So when will energy bills fall?
Well, that is the pressure on every part of government to make sure that we are accelerating the investment in renewables, getting the new energy on stream, and also attracting the investment and creating the jobs. And let's not forget, this is a government that's been in power for 7 months across the UK, when we've been promised a renewables revolution by an SNP government for well over a decade, hasn't transpired, and by a UK government for over a decade as well, and hasn't transpired. But in the face of that, we've had a UK Labour government pass the legislation on GB Energy, start the process of setting up the company of GB Energy, identifying some of the early investments they want to make, recognizing that means investing in our port infrastructure, our supply chain infrastructure, because that's where the large scale jobs are going to come from, but also opening up the UK to huge investment to come into the country. So not everything having to be done by the public purse, but actually attracting billions of pounds of inward investment into the country. But Scotland is turning its face on that because we have an ideological block from an SNP government that does not want billions of pounds to come to Scotland, that doesn't want thousands of jobs to come to Scotland, and doesn't want energy security for Scotland. Doesn't sound very nationalistic to me. It sounds like people that are actually letting down Scotland, and that's why we will break that ideological block, as well as, of course, investing in renewables, and of course, making sure that our oil and gas industry plays a significant role for decades to come, because it's a huge and significant part of our energy mix, but also our economic stability.
Will energy bills be falling by the time of the Holyrood election?
I absolutely hope so. I want energy bills to fall as soon as possible because I want the cost of living crisis to be alleviated. I want us to reform our energy market, and I want people to feel the benefit of those investments. And so that government is working day and night to, as I say, reform the energy market, attract the investments, and try and bring down energy bills.
So let's focus on your conference. I think you're speaking on the Friday. I think a valid criticism that's been made of Scottish Labour is that you focus too much on what the SNP are doing wrong, and you've not been focusing enough on what your positive alternative is. So is that something that you're going to be addressing at the conference?
Well, again, taking the challenge head on, is it was right for us in the run up to July 2024 to demonstrate to people what the choice was in terms of a continuation of a Tory government that was doing so much damage to our country, or how you put Scotland at the heart of a Labour government and make sure Scotland leads the way in getting rid of a Tory government. And we did that in July 2024. Since then, we have set out some examples of what we would do differently, but we are also demonstrating how the SNP has taken our country in the wrong direction. And we've been doing that over the last number of months. What you are going to see this week and at our conference and between now and May 2026 is us setting out really clearly what a new direction means in practice. So again, I'll give you some practical examples. Take our transport infrastructure. I know you took the train through from Edinburgh this morning to Glasgow.
Breaks my heart. I know
that was a painful experience for you, not purely because of the cost of the rail fare, but also because you prefer the other side of the M8.
I love Glasgow.
He says now, I quite like Edinburgh too, but I love Glasgow. But the point I'm making though is we are penalising people. So at a time when we want to address the climate emergency, at a time when we want to get people out of cars and into trains, at a time when we want to alleviate the cost of living crisis, and we want to increase footfall for businesses, particularly in our town centres and our city centres, we are reinstating, as in the Scottish Government is reinstating, peak rail fares. It is economically the wrong decision, socially the wrong decision, and environmentally the wrong decision. That's why a Scottish Labour government will remove the peak rail fares to make sure we are reducing the cost of living crisis and making sustainable transport a thing for the future. That's just one practical example. We are going to be setting out what we're doing differently around fixing the NHS to clear the NHS backlogs in the here and now. We'll be setting that out this week. We'll be setting out what reforms we'll be making to the NHS to make it fit for purpose. We've given an example already where we are a bureaucracy and management heavy NHS, where we pick the managers and the bureaucrats before we do the nurses and the doctors, which is completely the wrong approach to take. We have 50 boards for a population of 5.5 million people. I want fewer chief executives. I want fewer pen pushers. I want fewer managers. I want more nurses. I want more doctors. I want more consultants. And I want more treatments to be happening in the NHS. We have an NHS that lives in the analog age. There are still doctors writing paper prescriptions, which is not acceptable. We still have patients not able to access booking, for example, through digital means. That has to be fundamentally addressed. And we're going to demonstrate how the digital revolution will help improve efficiency in the NHS, but also help improve the speed of diagnosis and also the types and speed of treatment that people can get in the National Health Service. We're going to look at workforce planning to make sure we actually have a credible workforce plan for the first time in well over a decade in Scotland's NHS. We're going to shift the balance away from purely thinking about acute care, but also thinking about prevention so we can stop people getting sick in the first place and actually have a health service rather than a service that only reacts to people when they get into an emergency situation. We're going to end the reliance on people having to go private. Right now, there are people, and we used the example last week, where we're going to maintain free prescriptions, which is the right thing to do, but we're going to stop people having to mortgage their homes in order to get a hip replacement. There are people who are taking out thousands of pounds of loans, either from the bank or by remortgaging their homes or borrowing money from friends and family to get the basic healthcare they need because of the shambles of this SNP government. We are going to end that by maximising capacity, adding additional capacity, and make sure we have those innovative treatments of the future. That's just some of the examples around our health service. We've set out what we're going to do differently on energy by breaking the ideological block on new nuclear projects that will mean billions of pounds of investment, thousands of new jobs, and energy security, as well as, of course, the renewables revolution by having that genuine partnership between GB Energy, but also what we do here in terms of our own investments. Scotland being the perfect example of that. Why are we not using that Scotland money to attract investment into our country rather than it being used as an overdraft facility for an economically illiterate SNP government? We're going to set out how we're going to stop the waste, billions of pounds of money wasted by this SNP government. We're going to demonstrate how we're going to spend money well and respect every penny of public money. We're going to demonstrate the levers that we have in Scotland to grow Scotland's economy. Planning, wholly devolved. We're going to reform our planning system. Rates, wholly devolved. We're going to change the way we do our rate system. Licensing, wholly devolved. Our licensing system isn't fit for purpose and meet the needs of our town centres and our high streets right now. Skills, wholly devolved. We're going to set out what we'll do differently with our skills system so every young person has the opportunity to thrive, not just those that choose to go to university. Transport, wholly devolved. We're going to demonstrate how we'll build regional transport mechanisms to make sure people can get in and around their own region and help grow their own economy. These are all examples of tangible differences that we will set out and make clear how we can deliver a new direction for Scotland. And every single one of those examples I've given you, I have not used one attack on the SNP. What I've instead demonstrated is how they are failing previously in a previous answer, but I've set out what we would do differently if we have a Scottish Labour government, because that's the choice people are going to face in May 2026. They face 5 more years of the SNP and John Swinney, or they have the choice of a Scottish Labour government and with me as First Minister. And that's what I'm going to advocate, that's what I'm going to campaign for, and that's what I hope to persuade the people of Scotland on between now and May 2026.
Let's just go back to the peak rail policy. I think that's a new commitment. I think passengers feel very frustrated that the SNP scrapped the peak fares and then went back on the policy. So it's almost like they were marched up to the top of the hill and then marched back down again. I mean, are you saying that if you're First Minister, then peak fares will go forever?
Yes, because one, they didn't do a proper study. They didn't do a proper evaluation. They didn't market it properly. And I have already spoken to countless individuals who have gone back to using motor vehicles instead of the trains in order to get to work, or indeed choosing to work from home instead of going into the office. Now, I'm not saying that working from home is the wrong thing to do, but actually, if we are going to reinvigorate our high streets and ramp up productivity in our country, then that also means increasing the footfall in our town centres and our city centres. And right now, footfall has dropped significantly in our town centres and city centres. And anyone that's been in the city centre of Glasgow will know that and understand that. So we are going to do the right thing for businesses. We're going to do the right thing for the economy, and we're going to do the right thing for the environment. And that is remove peak rail fares and help alleviate the cost of living crisis and demonstrate a different approach by government.
Just another cost that has been borne by record readers and Scots everywhere, higher income tax. Now, when I speak to people, they're not against the principle of paying higher income tax. What they're against is paying higher income tax and getting poorer services. So this idea that you're paying more to get less. If you're First Minister in 2026, will you try and reverse some of the SNP income tax rises that fall on people on modest and middle incomes?
So the first thing to say is we will not increase income tax, because I think the tax burden is too high for people in Scotland right now. And I think that is detracting for talent coming in, and it's detracting from investments coming into Scotland. I want to reduce the tax burden, and I want us to stop using income tax as a substitute for economic growth or as a mechanism to make up for government waste or government incompetence. What I'm not going to do, it would be irresponsible for me, is to write a budget or a tax policy for an individual budget this far out from what a First Labour budget would be likely in November 2026. That would be an irresponsible thing to do. But I'm very clear, we will not increase income tax. I want to reduce the tax burden. And the way we do that is by making sure we actually grow our economy, because we've not had a growth strategy from this SNP government. And we've also got to make sure we stop the massive amount of waste of public money by this SNP government. Now, they'll deny they're wasting money, but you ask anyone out there in the real world if they believe that for the tens of billions of pounds that this SNP government has to spend every year, of the hundreds of billions of pounds it has spent of public money in the last 18 years, do people think they're spending it wisely? Do people think every penny has been spent well? Do they think every pound has been respected? Do they think there's waste or no waste right now in the system? And every single one of them, unless they're in the SNP bubble will say that there is wasted public money every single day from this SNP government. We will end the waste, deliver economic growth, and therefore be able to make the investments we need. And I hope to be able to reduce the tax burden on working Scots.
So obviously you're not going to write the first budget if you become First Minister on this show, but in terms of the principle, you support the principle of reversing some of the SNP income tax rises?
As I say, we will not increase income tax. I want to reduce the tax burden, and I would love to cut income tax, particularly for those on the lowest incomes. But there's also a gap and a discrepancy in our current tax system where those on middle incomes are paying a disproportionately higher level of their income in terms of marginal tax rate, which again is having a detrimental impact on our economy and a detrimental impact on attracting talent into Scotland. That will have to be corrected, but we will have to do that in a way that is sound with the public finances. So no increases in income tax. We want to reduce the tax burden, but we're going to do it in a responsible way.
So Grangemouth, hundreds of workers are facing losing their jobs. You said during the election, and I'll just quote you, that you would step in to save the jobs, or at least the Labour government would. Wasn't that a naive thing to say? Wasn't it a hostage to fortune? You were making a promise that you simply could not keep, because as you've said subsequently, this is a private company.
Well, the real frustrating thing here is that the UK government and the Scottish government have known for 5 years what was happening in Grangemouth and what was going to happen in Grangemouth and failed to take any meaningful action. And that's a deep, deep frustration. And because of their inability and their unwillingness to take meaningful action, the company in question had already started before the election of a UK Labour government to downgrade and decommission parts of the refinery in the site at Grangemouth, which in itself has a negative economic impact and negative impact on the jobs. And whilst a UK Labour government has come in and overcome the fact that the last Tory government had no plan at all to deal with Grangemouth, and whilst the Scottish government had no plan to deal with Grangemouth, it has taken meaningful action in that it's attempted to work in partnership with the Scottish government. And actually, for all the battles and the criticisms that no doubt Labour and the SNP will have between now and the election and over the last number of years, when you talk to ministers privately on both sides, they actually believe that both governments have tried to work and have worked relatively well when it's come to trying to find solutions in Grangemouth. And that's why we've seen, for example, the Falkirk and Grangemouth growth deal. We've seen a commitment from the employers that no worker will miss out on vital income. So they've got an income guarantee for around 18 months. I believe there has been the investment in Project Willow to find alternatives and to try and attract options and investment into the site. But I think more needs to be done, and I don't think enough has been done. And I've been very open and honest about that. I don't think enough has been done with pace in order to attract investment, to give confidence to the local community that they are going to see a proper sustainable future for the Grangemouth site, and that it's attracting more jobs for the future rather than simply just trying to protect the jobs that already exist there. And I want to see more action, and that's what I'll continue to push for from both governments, because I think the Scottish government has been far too slow on this too, and so I want to see more action.
No one's suggesting that the Tory government and the SNP government has done well on the Grangemouth issue, but you did make a commitment before the election, and people are facing the dole. So if you're a Grangemouth worker, how would you expect them to feel about that?
Well, I am really struck by the level of intransigence, actually, from the company. I was hopeful that we could get a deal, get an agreement, but there has been a level of intransigence. And our challenge is that we cannot allow a workforce, a community, and a site that is of a huge asset to our country to be run down, because that would be the wrong thing for us to do economically, as well as the wrong thing for that part of our great country. And therefore, we have to see a much more robust response from governments to make sure that we are attracting investments into the site, that we're providing the relative support that's required to make sure the workers are getting the reskilling they need if they need to be reskilled into other jobs, or that they are getting a pathway into other jobs too. But again, I repeat, there has been working with the company in order to give a 18-month income guarantee, so no one is going to miss out in terms of not being able to put food on the table for their families. But I want to see investment and acceleration of investment into the Grangemouth site so it can have the jobs and the opportunities of the future. And I think on that, not enough has been done. And I'm really open about that.
Just a final question before we come to our quick fire round. Is it accurate that you're going to be making more international trips in the next few months? You're going to be going abroad, maybe raise your international profile?
So what I want to do is I want to demonstrate the soft power of Scotland in order to attract investment and opportunities for the people of Scotland. So what I mean by that is, how do we use the fact that there is this natural affinity and love for Scotland in other parts of the UK, other parts of the EU, other parts of the world, that means that we can attract exports out of Scotland, investments into Scotland, and opportunities and jobs for the people of Scotland. That's why I've already been in Germany, for example, advocating for and attracting investment in our renewables infrastructure in Scotland. It's why I'll be in other parts of the world in the coming months.
America, Tartan Week, maybe?
So I'll be in the Republic of Ireland. I'll be back in the EU. I'll be in the US. I'll be in other places trying to strengthen those economic and cultural ties for maximum economic benefit for Scotland. And that's what I want to do. I want to demonstrate that this is a Scotland that is on the world stage, that is attracting investment, that is maximizing exports, and getting things done for the people of Scotland.
So the most famous Scottish American is President Trump. Let's imagine you're at Tartan Week and that you get some FaceTime with him. What would your message be to him?
Depends how long I've got, Paul.
10 minutes.
There's a lot to cover in 10 minutes. Look, I think the key point is this. No one is going to be under any surprise that I have fundamental political disagreements with Donald Trump. And there are a whole host of them. I won't go into all the examples, but you can probably imagine what a huge number of those disagreements are. But despite those disagreements, and actually because of those disagreements, actually the relationship between business to business, people to people, and government to government gets even more important, because America is a security ally, it is a trade ally, and we have a huge shared history. And the size and scale of the Scottish diaspora in North America and the US in particular cannot be underestimated. But right now, we're not tapping into that in enough, I believe, in order to maximize the opportunities. Actually, a really good example of, and one of the reasons why I'm going to be in the Republic of Ireland, is a really good example of those that have managed to do it really well, is actually Ireland. They have managed to tap into Irish culture, Irish identity, and the Irish diaspora in order to attract tourism, investment, and export into Ireland and exports out of Ireland. I want to do the same with Scotland. And that's what I would emphasize, as well as being clear on other important issues, whether that be on global politics or indeed in national politics. I want it to be clear that Scotland is open for business. We want investment. We want a trade partnership. We want cultural ties. And if the fact that the President of the US has a Scottish mother can help with that, then I'm more than happy to project that too.
If you got that sit down, what would you say to him about tariffs and the impact on key Scottish industries?
Well, I think the really important point here is when it comes to particularly our whiskey industry, who, for understandable reasons, will be nervous about tariffs. It's putting tariffs on the whiskey industry is not actually helping to promote or sustain US products. All it is doing is negatively impacting on Scottish products. And so therefore, I don't think we should have tariffs on our whiskey exports. And I would hope that the US can see that actually we are currently in a trade deficit with the USA. We don't have a trade excess with the USA. We have a trade deficit with the USA. And I know there's other countries, for example, where there is a trade deficit with the US, and therefore President Trump is very aggressively going down the tariff route. That's not the case with the UK. And therefore, I don't think we need to get into that kind of battle, because it's bad for the US market, but I believe it's also bad, even more importantly, for the Scottish market and the UK market. So I don't think that's a route that the President of the US needs to go down. And I think there are stronger cultural, economic, and business ties that we can have that are good for Scotland, good for the UK, and good for the US. And that means keep all the big political disagreements we have, but that shouldn't negatively impact our people or our businesses, because that would be wrong for our economy and wrong for national and global security.
So, in closing, let's have 5 quick-fire questions.
These are good. These are good fun.
So,
Do I get to ask you something back?
No, definitely not. Who would you rather have dinner with, the Prime Minister or the Chancellor?
Oh, I have dinner with both of them, and
You have to pick one.
I will pick one. So I'll be honest here, right? I made this clear to Keir Starmer. I said that, Keir, you are going to be my favourite UK Labour politician before the election, and the Chancellor's going to be my favourite politician after the election, because she's the one with the bank balance. So I'll choose the Chancellor.
So basically, Keir's boring. Okay, I hear
Not
you.
at all. He's great fun, honestly. Give him a salmon tandoori at Mr. Singh's and a beer, and he's great fun.
Question 2. If you were to fall under a bus, who would make a better successor, Jackie Bailey or Michael Mara?
I'm going to avoid falling under a bus. But I'm sure they could fight out between themselves. It's for the good membership of the Scottish Labour Party to decide who any future leader is in 50 years' time.
As revealed by the Daily Record, you have a league table of the best and worst performing
I don't know who told you that. Who told you that? Who
and
told you that?
MPs.
Are you not going to relieve your sources, Paul?
Always protect sources. Who's the dunce at the bottom?
I don't view any such league tables on a daily basis, and all Scottish
Fortnightly.
and all Scottish Labour MPs and MSPs are performing very well, and I want them to up the energy and ante as we head towards the election in May 2026.
Lies. Question 4.
They're all fantastic parliamentarians serving their great community and fighting to deliver a Scottish Labour
Well,
government.
there's the line. Question 4. GRR. Do you regret voting for it?
Look, I've already made clear that if we had gone through that process again, we wouldn't have done it the way we did, because I think we should have been much, much more robust and strong on the amendments that we wanted to see. And I think we were too trusting of government, to be honest, when they told us on the record that nothing in the bill would negatively interact with the Equality Act. That's proven not to be the case. And they said that they would protect single-sex spaces based on biological sex. That's proven not to be the case. And actually, we have a case in NHS Fife right now, despite not having the enactment of the GRR. I think there has been institutional capture, which means you have the situation you have in NHS Fife. My support for single-sex spaces and services based on biological sex is unshakable, and no nurse should be going to any employment tribunals because of changing rooms. I just don't think that's acceptable. So our support for single-sex spaces based on biological sex and services, NHS services being a good example of that, is robust.
Question 5. Obviously, your politics are red, but your football is a different colour. So Philippe Clement, should he stay or should he go?
I am from Asian origin. I watch cricket, and I'm not sure who the manager of the cricket team is right now, but I'm sure Trudy, the CEO of Scottish Cricket, will be on very, very quickly to tell me who it is. So I'll continue to champion that great sport, cricket.
Even your aides are laughing at that one. Thank you, Anas. That was excellent. That's another edition of Planet
My pleasure.
Holyrood.
Thank you.
Thanks to Anas again for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the show.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.